Welcome to the channel. I am your host, and tonight we begin a journey into the shadows of the American dream. In the heart of a bitter Chicago winter, we find two men trapped between their pride and their reality. Meet Asher, a visionary artist whose brilliance is currently obscured by the grime of a low-rent studio and the crushing weight of a creative block. Beside him is Leo, a corporate accountant who spends his days balancing the fortunes of the elite while his own bank account bleeds out in the red. They are roommates by desperate necessity, living in a space where the heat is a luxury and silence is a defense mechanism. Tonight, we witness the moment their carefully constructed facades begin to crumble. This is a story of the forbidden, the unspoken, and the price of survival. Let us dive into the cold. The radiator hissed a final, dying breath before falling silent. Asher watched the small cloud of his own respiration vanish into the dim gray light of the afternoon. He was hunched over a canvas that had remained white for 3 weeks. His fingers were stiff, the joints aching from the seep of the lakefront wind through the cracked window pane. He reached into the pocket of his frayed hoodie and pulled out a small brass key. It had a chipped blue enamel head, a peculiar object he had found embedded in the floorboards when they moved in. He did not know what it opened, but the weight of it in his palm was the only thing that felt solid in a life made of debt and disappointment. The front door groaned on its hinges. Leo walked in, the collar of his expensive wool overcoat turned up against the cold. To anyone on the street, Leo looked like a man of status, a rising star in the financial district. Asher knew the truth. That coat was a shield, a piece of armor bought 3 years ago when Leo still believed he could outrun his student loans. Now, it was a lie he wore every morning. Leo dropped his leather briefcase on the scarred wooden table and didn't move. He stood there, staring at the stack of envelopes on the counter. The top one was bright pink. A final notice. Asher shifted on his stool, the wood creaking under his weight. He wanted to say something, but the words felt like stones in his mouth. To speak was to acknowledge that they were failing. To speak was to admit that the dream of a life together in the city was turning into a slow-motion wreck. Leo finally turned around. His face was drawn, his skin sallow under the harsh fluorescent bulb of the kitchenette. He looked at the blank canvas and then at Asher. There was no judgment in his eyes, only a profound, echoing exhaustion. He walked to the cupboard and pulled out a single package of instant noodles. It was the last one. He didn't ask if Asher had eaten. He simply put the kettle on the stove and waited for the blue flame to ignite. It didn't. Leo clicked the dial again, and again. The rhythmic snap of the igniter was the only sound in the apartment. Nothing. He turned the dial all the way back and stared at the stovetop. The gas had been cut. Asher stood up, the brass key still gripped tightly in his hand. He walked over to Leo, the distance between them feeling like a canyon. They had lived together for a year, sharing a space no bigger than a mid-sized sedan, yet they had never been more than roommates. They were two men who had mastered the art of looking away. But in the silence of the cold kitchen, the pretense was evaporating. "I can go to the corner store," Asher said, his voice sounding foreign in his own ears. "I have some change in the jar. I can get some bread." Leo didn't look up. He leaned his forehead against the cold metal of the vent hood. "We are $200 short for the utility bill, Asher, and the rent is due on Friday. I took an advance on my next 3 paychecks just to cover the last month. There is nothing left." The admission hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. This was the shame of the middle class, the quiet desperation of men who were told they could have everything if they worked hard enough, only to find themselves shivering in the dark. Asher felt a sudden, violent surge of protectiveness. He looked at Leo's trembling hands. The accountant, the man who calculated millions, was breaking down over a dead stove. Asher moved closer, his heart hammering against his ribs. He reached out, his hand hovering inches from Leo's shoulder. This was the forbidden territory. They had kept their relationship strictly functional to avoid the complication of their mutual attraction, a pull that had been there since the first day they signed the lease. To give in to it now felt like an act of surrender. It felt like admitting they had nothing left but each other. He let his hand fall, his fingers grazing the rough wool of Leo's coat. Leo flinched slightly but didn't pull away. Instead, he leaned into the touch, a soft, broken sound escaping his throat. Asher stepped into his space, the heat from Leo's body the only warmth in the room. He could smell the faint scent of expensive coffee and cold wind clinging to him. The attraction was a physical ache now, a hunger that rivaled the emptiness in his stomach. He saw Leo's eyes flutter shut, his long lashes casting shadows on his pale cheeks. "I'm sorry," Leo whispered. "I thought I could handle this. I thought I could take care of us." "You don't have to do it alone," Asher replied. He moved his hand to Leo's jaw, his thumb brushing over the stubble there. It was the first time they had truly touched, a moment of profound emotional surrender. The air seemed to vibrate between them, the tension of months of denial finally snapping. Leo opened his eyes, and for a second, the poverty and the debt didn't matter. There was only the blue of Asher's eyes and the desperate need for connection. Leo reached up, his fingers locking around Asher's wrist. He didn't push him away. He pulled him closer until their chests were touching. The kiss was not soft. It was a collision of two starving people, a desperate, frantic search for something real in a world that was falling apart. It tasted of salt and coffee and the raw edge of panic. It was the most honest thing either of them had done in years. They broke apart, both gasping for air in the freezing room. The reality of their situation came rushing back, colder than before. They were still poor. They were still in the dark. And now they were something else, something they couldn't undo. The lights suddenly flickered once, twice, and then the entire apartment was plunged into total darkness. The power was gone too. In the sudden blackness, the sound of the mail slot clicking open was like a gunshot. A heavy envelope slid across the linoleum floor, hitting Asher's foot. Asher reached down, feeling the thick paper. He walked to the window, using the faint glow of the street lamps outside to read the front. It wasn't a bill. There was no return address, only Leo's name written in a precise, archaic hand. Leo took the envelope, his fingers fumbling with the seal. He pulled out a single sheet of paper and a small, heavy object that hit the floor with a metallic ring. Asher knelt down and picked it up. It was a second key, identical to the one in Asher's pocket, but this one had a head of chipped red enamel. Leo read the letter, his face turning a ghostly white in the moonlight. He dropped the paper as if it had burned him. "What is it?" Asher asked, his voice tight with a new kind of fear. Leo looked at him, his eyes wide and vacant. "We have to leave, Asher. We have to leave right now." Before Asher could ask why, a heavy, rhythmic pounding began on the door. It wasn't the landlord. It wasn't a bill collector. The sound was deliberate, slow, and terrifyingly powerful, shaking the very frame of their fragile sanctuary. What will happen next? If you are enjoying the story, please like, share, and subscribe to our channel before we move to Chapter 2.